This is Danny Flexen here for Seconds Out. As most of you watching will by now be aware, Daniel Kinahan was among 7 people sanctioned by the US government today, and a reward was offered by them also for any information leading to his arrest and or conviction, along with other members of the, I think we have to say alleged for legal reasons, but the Kinahan organised crime group. And one man who's documented Kinahan's trials and tribulations, although not as many trials as perhaps a lot of people would like, is Kieran Cunningham, also the chief sports writer for the Irish Daily Star. Kieran, thank you for joining me.
No problem, Danny.
I think first of all, just to hear from you, how much of an inkling, if at all, did you have that these sanctions were coming, and why are the US particularly so motivated to take these actions?
Well, we actually had the story yesterday, Michael O'Toole, the crime correspondent. We had the story yesterday, so we knew from 2 days ago that this was happening. And then it broke, and obviously there's far more detail in what's involved. But this has all been building, Danny. Like, it's not just, this didn't come from anywhere. Because a lot of people would have looked on this, as kind of an Irish story, it's small gangland thing, and you have gangland everywhere, and it's not like Dublin, small town, small story. It doesn't really relate to us. But then when the National Crime Agency in the UK, when the guy Thomas Kavanagh, who was, one of Kinahan's top people in the cartel, when he was jailed, and the National Crime Agency went public and named the Kinahan organised cartel, and that Daniel Kinahan is the head of it. That was the first time outside Ireland that had ever happened. And then you've the what they call the Criminal Assets Bureau in Ireland. That started seizing properties that are linked to the Kinahan cartel, has made a major grab the last couple of weeks. So there's been, I knew that the Gardaí, which are the police here, that they've been working with a lot of international police forces and crime agencies in the UK, in Europe, like Europol, police forces in Spain, etc., and the US. So this is the culmination of a couple of years' work. And it's hugely significant because of the connections between the UAE and the US. They're very close. The UAE do not want to annoy the US. So if you look at, there's a couple of very prominent gangland figures, one Dutch and one Italian, who've been extradited from Dubai in the last few months. And both were at Daniel Kinahan's wedding. So the pressure, Dubai are very conscious of getting more conscious of the reputation. There's such a huge location for tourism, etc., and wanting to host major events. And suddenly, after a while, Daniel Kinahan becomes a problem for them if he's not already. And the question then, Danny, is where does he go? If he sets foot in European soil, he's arrested. He's not allowed to go into America. So it's very limited. Like, where's he going? Is he going to go to Africa? Is he going to go to South America? I don't think there's anywhere for him to run now. I think we're getting into the end game. That 79 members of his cartel have been brought to justice. A lot of them are, like, a lot of his most trusted lieutenants. So the net has been closing. But this is huge. And I would say there's a lot of people within boxing who work very closely with Kinahan, who are very nervous today and have been having meetings today because they do not want it to come out how closely they've worked with this guy.
Now, the sanctions in material terms, what do they mean? I know there's bank accounts have been frozen, use of debit cards and so on. Properties can no longer be accessed in the US. How will this curb some of what the Kinahan group is supposed to be or allegedly doing?
Well, as far as I gather, like, this wouldn't be an area of expertise for me, I would have to say, Danny, but as far as I can gather from what I've read about and been told about it, any business that can be proven, or there's pretty strong evidence that there's a connection to Kinahan, they will basically not be allowed to operate. So, for example, there's a few boxing companies that are linked to Kinahan or have had links to Kinahan. If they're gone into now, it'd be very interesting what happens. I could see all sorts of things happening. Like, there was a high profile, we were supposed to get this massive podcast interview with Daniel Kinahan, 3 hours at James English a couple of weeks ago, and that was stopped. I could see the authorities trying to get their hands on that now, because he talked about the Regency shooting, and I think that's why it was pulled. In the little clip they showed, I think his lawyer said, you cannot talk about this in public. And I could see the authorities going after it. The authorities are going to go after everything now because they want to get him. Like 5 million, going public in a war like that, because they're like the Wild West. It's not something you see. So like, this is very serious there. Like, you don't normally see wanted posters these days.
Yeah, something I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned there about the James English podcast, which was pulled. We've seen Daniel Kinahan pictured recently with the WBC president, with Ahmet Owner, over in Pakistan and talking to people there. How much of the kind of gradual cranking up of the pressure on him do you feel he's brought on himself by being quite bold and, you know, about his involvement in big sporting events? I'm sure he's been advised to draw back.
Well, that's a very interesting question, because if you know, even when the head of the Irish police spoke today, Drew Harris, you know, he spoke about boxing, and, you know, that boxing and sport has to take this guy seriously. And boxing, his involvement in boxing has highlighted who he is and what he is. Like, if he'd stayed in the background, but I think there's an ego with Daniel Kinahan and an arrogance. And I think he always had this will to be Mr. Big in boxing, that he would have looked at, say, the ages of Bob Arum and Don King, you know, and figured, you know, and looked at around a few of the others in the game and figured there might be a void here. I could take over. And it depends on what you believe. Like, some people say the most powerful figure in boxing, you know, but there's always hype. You don't know what, but, you know, we do know for a fact he is involved in a lot of big fights. He did help make a lot of big fights. But you go look, like I've been working, it's been coming out soon, a podcast series on Kinahan and boxing called Shadow Boxing, and talking to a lot of people within it, and they'll all tell you, you know, oh, he's involved in a lot of boxing and he advises this guy and this guy. And then you approach them, like the TV company or the management company, say, did you talk to Daniel Kinahan? They all say either no, or they don't they don't give you any answer. But so he's obviously talking to somebody. So I think this puts, particularly in TV companies, because boxing needs the TV money. You know, boxing will not survive without the TV money. And I was with a lot of people within TV now who are very nervous, because at the powers that be will be looking at it and say, we'll lose advertisers over this. If it comes out that we've been negotiating with this guy, and, you know, it's all going to come out who he is and what he is, then do we want to be associated with? So I think the repercussions are huge, and I don't know how it panned out. Like, next week will be interesting because of the Tyson Fury fight, and there will be press conferences, and I think it has to come up. Like, they might well say, you're not allowed to ask about this, but journalists will ask. They have to ask next week, you know, because this has only really become a story outside Ireland because of what Tyson Fury said 2 years ago. You know, he brought it into the open, you know, and possibly because Daniel Kinahan told him to. Wouldn't be surprised at all with that.
The kind of widespread silence that we've seen throughout boxing as regards to Daniel Kinahan, do you think today's events, the sanctions, the high profile, also the reward that's now on offer, do you think that will start to change?
In what way? That more people will speak out against him?
Yeah, do you think more people will be open enough to talk about him?
They might, because they mightn't feel as much threat. You know, there was a reason. I can perfectly understand why some people would have been a bit afraid to get involved in this story, because you're dealing with a serious outfit. You know, it's not somebody going to give you a bollock in a press conference. It could be a bit more serious than that, you know. So I can understand, you know, why that happens, and also the way boxing operates. Like, I sometimes get angry and crank about, you know, some of the online media, and I don't mean anything in particular, like yourself, or like I don't think I shouldn't, you know, generalize, but there are certain outlets that Kinahan cultivated, you know, and the PR basically for him, and then even like the established, you know, like the newspaper journalists, etc. The way boxing operates, you're very dependent on them. Like, if you write an article criticizing FIFA, you still get accreditation for the World Cup. Yeah. But if you're very critical of Matchroom, you might get accreditation for the next Matchroom fight, you know, and that's not picking a Matchroom, but that's just the way boxing is. The relationship is very different. And also, I think it does, you know, what all this story highlights to me, Danny, is there's no governance in boxing. Like, we know that. There's no real international governing body controls the sport. Like, you look at what British Boxing Control, what Robert Smith said. I can't remember who he talked to about this, but he was asked, would Daniel Kinahan get a manager's license? And he said, no way. We couldn't give him a manager's license. But because he is a manager, but he calls himself as an advisor. Because he's an advisor, they say they can't do anything. Now, that's a ridiculous way for sport to operate. You know, you have to have a way around that a guy can just go in and basically, because of his money, get to a really high level in the sport with no scrutiny, and people saying they can't do anything about it. Like, so if anything comes out of it, I would hope to be more governance or proper governance. But you look at boxing's history and you wouldn't hold out hope of that happening, you know.
Do you think he'll now become a bit of a pariah even within boxing? Do you think, or is it just going to be a case of people go behind closed doors and try and kind of erase or make thinner the lines that connect him to this?
Well, I noticed, a few tweets have been deleted today. I noticed by different people, so praising him. So, but the internet never forgets. I think there's a record of various things. I think it will be. It's going to be a bit trickier for some people in boxing. Like I saw what you asked Eddie Hearn about him, and Eddie answered the question, but he didn't answer it. You know, it's kind of evasive, and that's the way a lot of people within boxing have been. They kind of talk around and say, "Oh, you know, you deal with whoever. If I'm told to deal with this guy, make a fight, I talk to him. You know, that's all I do." But I think now, like whatever about Panorama, people say, "No, there's nothing new," or whatever else has come out. You know, this is really, there's very specific detail in this stuff from the US. You know, even going into, you know, a management company in Dubai that nobody really knew anything about, and managers like it's involved with Billy Joe Saunders and Michael Connell and a few other people. You know, a vodka company in Glasgow. Like there's various things highlighted people didn't know about. So a lot of detail.
Now, back here with Kieran Cunningham, not sure quite what went wrong there on the technical side. We were just talking about whether people in boxing would now start to avoid at least overt links with Daniel Kinahan, given today's news. What were your views on that?
I think a lot of people would definitely be more reluctant, particularly TV executives, because you know the close relationship between TV needs to keep advertisers sweet. Advertisers are very PR conscious. You know, are they going to want to be associated with a boxing bill that they think might have a link to Daniel Kinahan? I think there will definitely be more scrutiny around now, because this now has become more of a global story. Like you'll see a lot more coverage in the US media, and because of that, there will be, you know, the upcoming fights now, starting with Tyson Fury one next week. You know, you can see a lot of journalists who wouldn't normally be in the boxing beat turning up, whether they get accreditation or not. I think it closed last Friday, but there might be pressure put on to open it up a bit. But I think there definitely will be more questions posed around that, and I think it will be harder to bat away the questions. Like people are usually have a pat answer if you bring up Daniel Kinahan's name, but I think the amount of detail that's coming out, I think that won't be accepted anymore.
Now, should point out that officially links between MTK Global, which was the management company co-founded by Kinahan, and Kinahan himself were severed back in, I think, 2017. So that's 5 years ago now. More recently, he's been linked to a new promotional outfit, Probellum, as I'm sure you're aware. He was featured on Twitter doing some sort of boxing-related meeting in Pakistan, I believe it was, and he was linked by the person who tweeted, who was some member of the Punjab government, with Probellum, although there's been no official word on whether he has a role there, or if he's a consultant or anything of that nature. Are these the sort of outfits that should be worried, whether there's an official link or not? The likes of Probellum and other companies that are getting associated with him publicly.
Well, yeah, I think like Probellum are very staunch in their denials of any involvement, but you know, we do see stuff that does make you wonder. Like there does seem to be so many links, so many people that have involvement in both MTK or Probellum. And you know, MTK traditionally had a link to Kinahan. It's unclear what the situation is now, but you do get, you know, you had that email from, or the tweet from a sports minister in you know, talking in Pakistan, talking about meeting Sandra Vaughan and Daniel Kinahan and naming Probellum. And Probellum say, you know, that was wires crossed, you know, that the meetings were separate. But it does make people wonder, and I think it will make people question Probellum a bit more. You know, like Matt Christie in Boxing News says, you know, and Brad is very brave, because Boxing News is very dependent on the boxing industry to keep going. You know, it needs boxing ads to survive, and it needs to keep on the right side of people within boxing. But, you know, he did point out that Probellum have always denied these links. But, you know, you have to start questioning a bit more what we're seeing in front of our eyes, I think.
How do you see this panning out? I mean, you said he's got very few places left to run now. He's not welcome in most countries, obviously been holed up, if that's the right term, in Dubai for quite some time. How do you see this progressing now? I mean, is the net very much closing in, or are we at the end game now?
I would think so. You know, like I'm not a crime journalist, so I couldn't pretend to have any expertise, but my understanding it is. And, you know, as things stand, my understanding is he sleeps somewhere different every night. Like he's a number of residences around Dubai because of trying to avoid, you know, writs that might be served on him, you know, that have to be served person to person. But I think that there's just more pressure coming all the time, and the pressure now on the UAE authorities is massive. Like the US getting involved is a game changer. Like that they do not want to annoy the Americans. So I think time is running out for him. I think time is running out for him. I think eventually he will end up back in Dublin. He hasn't been in Dublin 6 years, and there's a very good reason for that. He'll be arrested if he comes back here, but I can see him coming back. I wouldn't be surprised if he's back at some stage this year.
You said earlier about a lot of people perceive this as kind of an Irish story or a smaller story than it is. That's obviously not the case anymore. Do you get any sense of personal vindication that the wider community, the wider world are now starting to recognise what this is all about?
No, because being honest, Danny, if Daniel Kinahan was Bulgarian, would I have the same interest in the story? And that's being honest, I wouldn't. So I have to be honest about that. But a lot of the stuff around the Kinahan Hutch feud, people who were shot dead, it happened 15 minutes walk from where I'm sitting now. So it was very close to home. My family would have been heavy involvement in boxing, and it's a sport that I've always loved. Like it's not a sport. Like I'm not a boxing journalist. I cover all sports. I covered boxing at Olympics and I covered World Championships and different things. But I'm not going to be claim anyway to be a boxing expert. But I think it's Ireland's most successful international sport, both at an amateur level and a professional level. And it's been very important in what it's done socially for people in very deprived areas here, as it has in a lot of deprived areas elsewhere. And I think Daniel Kinahan's involvement really damaged it. It damaged the image. It made it very hard for good people in boxing to get sponsors, to get on bills, to get, to make a living out of the sport. You haven't had a major fight in Dublin since the Regency. And that's down to the police. Ultimately, the police wouldn't sanction it because of security concerns. And there's no other capital city in Europe, I think, that would happen. So that shows the damage that has been done. You look at the Katie Taylor situation, has never fought here. And that's ultimately because it would be a massive fight. Massive fights are a magnet for gangland figures, Irish gangland figures. So that's the damage we've done. I don't feel any personal vindication because I honestly think it's just doing the job. Like I think this, to me, it was a massive sports story as well as being a crime story. It's because boxing has been so important to Ireland, and this guy was front and center of the sport. So I'm actually surprised that more sports journalists didn't get involved in it. That's been honest, but there's nothing personal. To be honest, I'd be relieved to move on to something else. It takes up a lot of headspace for a long time.
Let me ask you before I do let you move on, at least for today. I have to try and present the other side for sake of balance. There's boxers out there, and I've seen this before when it's blown up in the past with Daniel Kinahan, will say he's an advisor, he's a friend, he's never been convicted of a crime. That's the line that's often repeated on social media. Why can't people just leave him alone? There seems to be this sense among the people that are close to him that there's maybe a vendetta or that there's agendas involved. What would your response be to that?
Well, ultimately, like boxers, Danny, no coward goes in steps through the ropes. You need to be brave to go into boxing, particularly in professional boxing, when effectively your life can be on the line or your future health. One punch can be a game changer in terms of your future health prospects. So it's a brutal business and it's a very cynical business. And ultimately, in professional boxing, you're doing it for the money. Now, you might say, oh, I have a great dream of being world champion, or I want to be the greatest person to ever come out of Kazakhstan or Bulgaria or Ireland or wherever. But ultimately, it's about money and usually, trying to have a basic, decent living, build a decent life for your family that you wouldn't have a prospect of doing otherwise. You wouldn't have the skills or qualification to do so otherwise. So I can see where those boxers come from. If they're making money from Daniel Kinahan, being involved with him, he's treating them well, then I can understand why they'll say that everything is fine. But they are so narrow focused. Like, they're in this game to make money, and it's also a sport where so many people screw you. You know that. And like, there's just not proper regulation and across the board in boxing. Like, it shouldn't be a case that boxers feel Daniel Kinahan is a good guy. But that's the way boxing is. That's the state of boxing, So I can understand where they come from. I do understand.
Well, Kieran, I really appreciate you summing this all up for us. I think a lot of people out there will be more informed as a result. Yeah, let's get you back on in the future as this story continues to develop, if that's okay.
Okay, no problem, Danny. Thanks a million. Take care.